What would you do if a stranger on a plane held your baby for 5 minutes, then quietly handed you the keys to a new life you never thought you deserved? It started with a soft whimper, then two. A low, breathy cry from the left arm and a choked sob from the right. In row 28 of a packed, reedy flight from Paris to New York, Amelia Grant tightened her arms around her twin sons, rocking them in rhythm with nothing but desperation and sleep deprivation. The cabin stirred. A businessman across the aisle adjusted his noise-cancelling headphones. A teenage girl in the next row pulled her hoodie over her head with an exaggerated sigh. A woman near the front rang the flight attendant button with clear annoyance. No one said anything, but their silence was loud. Amelia whispered apologies no one seemed to hear. "I'm sorry. I'm trying." Her voice cracked, more breath than sound. Evan writhed in her left arm, face red and damp with tears. Elias, in her right, was inconsolable. Their cries cut through the narrow fuselage like a siren, high and constant. The sound of two fragile, overstimulated infants born 6 weeks too soon. Her spine ached, her arms were numb, her eyes stung. She hadn't slept since they left the hospital in Paris. The boys weren't just fussy, they were medically delicate. The pressure changes, the noise, the recycled cabin air. It was all too much for them. And for her. A flight attendant appeared beside her, her voice polite but clipped. "Ma'am, would you like to stand and rock them in the galley?" "There's more space." Amelia looked up, dazed, barely understanding the words. She nodded vaguely, though the thought of unbuckling the boys' tiny oxygen monitors and bottle tubes made her stomach knot. No one offered to help. Just judgment, just eyes, but then a voice. Calm, male, American. "Would you like some help?" Amelia turned her head. A man stood beside her, not young, not old, mid-40s maybe, dressed casually. Soft eyes, steady tone. There was no pity in his voice, just calm. She blinked, not sure what she'd heard. "I have some experience with babies," he said. "If it's okay with you, I could hold one for a bit. Give your arms a break." She hesitated. Her whole body had been trained to distrust kindness, especially the kind that came without warning. But something in his voice disarmed her. It was the steadiness, the gentleness. "You don't have to," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But I want to." Amelia looked down at Elias, still sobbing in tight little gasps. Her arms trembled as she slowly passed him to the man. The change was nearly instant. He held the child, the way you'd cradle something sacred, own arm steady beneath the boy's weight, the other gently across his back. He rocked slightly, whispering something Amelia couldn't quite hear, but whatever it was, it worked. Elias's cries softened, then stopped. His body slackened into rest. The cabin quieted. Amelia stared, stunned. The man didn't gloat or smile. He just kept rocking, calm and focused. "I'm Julian," he said finally. "Julian Westbrook." She nodded. "Amelia." She didn't ask who he was, or why he was traveling in economy, or how he knew how to calm a medically fragile infant, like he'd done it 1,000 times. She was too tired to question kindness. "You should sit," Julian said gently. Just for a moment. Amelia slid back into her seat, clutching Evan, who had stopped crying too, perhaps following his brother's lead. She didn't realize how exhausted she truly was until her bones melted into the seat and her eyelids began to droop. "You can rest," Julian added. "I'll hold him until you wake." "I shouldn't." "You can." And for the first time in months, Amelia believed it. She leaned gently sideways, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. Evan settled against her chest. Julian rocked Elias in rhythm with the low hum of the engines. The cabin dulled, the world went quiet, and Amelia Grant, a woman who hadn't known peace in what felt like forever, finally let herself let go. Amelia Grant woke to the soft hum of the captain's voice overhead. The plane had begun its slow descent, and the lights were dimmed to a warm amber glow. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then came the faint scent of baby powder, the weight of Evan in her arms, and the steady rhythm of breathing beside her. She blinked up and realized her head had been resting on Julian's shoulder. Her eyes widened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, straightening quickly. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you." Julian looked at her calmly, still cradling Elias in his arms. "You needed it," he said simply. They both stayed asleep almost the entire time. Amelia looked down at the twins, then back at him. "That's not normal. They never sleep this long." Julian kept his gaze on Elias. They felt safe. Sometimes, that's all it takes. She didn't know what to say to that. No one had said anything so kind in a long, long time. As the plane touched down with a soft thud, passengers stirred to life. Phones lit up, bags were shuffled. Julian carefully handed Elias back to her. She adjusted both babies, holding one in each arm like a fragile promise. "I owe you more than a thank you," she said softly. "I don't even know how to repay you." Julian reached into his carry-on and placed a small, cream-colored card on the tray table. "I don't expect anything," he said. "But if you ever need help, real help, call that number." Amelia glanced down. The card was simple. No logo, no title. Just his name, Julian Westbrook, and below it, Westbrook Foundation. She blinked, stunned. "You're that Julian Westbrook? The one who started?" He nodded, but casually. "You've heard of it? I've seen the name on shelters, bulletin boards, medical vans." She trailed off. "We try," he said, almost modestly. For a moment, her brain struggled to connect this quiet man beside her, the one who held her child without judgment, with the name tied to millions in charity and housing initiatives. "Why were you back here?" she finally asked. "You could have been in first class or on a private jet." "I fly economy sometimes," Julian replied. "It reminds me what real people go through. Not spreadsheets, not PR, reality." She stared at him, her heart heavier than her luggage. "I thought you were just a kind stranger." "I am," he said. "The rest is just context." Outside, the cold hit like a wall. Julian helped her collect the fraying suitcase from baggage claim and walked her to the curb. "I don't want this to be the last time I see you," he said. She hesitated. "Why?" "Because I think you're stronger than you realize. And I'd like to help if you'll let me." Amelia nodded once, tight, uncertain. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd like he'd never been there at all. The cab ride to Midtown was silent. Amelia clutched her sons, watching the city blur past. It was louder than Paris. Harder. Colder. She had pinned all her hope on a shelter she'd only contacted by email. It was all she had. When they arrived, she stepped inside, holding both boys and the suitcase that barely zipped. The front desk attendant looked up for just a second before shaking her head. "We're full." "I'm sorry. You can try again in the morning or get on the emergency wait list." Amelia's voice cracked. "I have 2 infants. I just need one night. I'll sleep on the floor." "There's nothing I can do," the woman said flatly. "Try the church on 37th. Back outside, Amelia stood in the freezing wind, her body aching, the boys starting to cry again. People passed her on the sidewalk, their eyes darting away like she was something they didn't want to see. She sat on the curb, trying to rock them, trying not to break. She had left. She had survived. But surviving meant nothing when the world kept shutting its doors. A black SUV pulled to a stop just a few feet away. She didn't look up. Then the window rolled down. "Amelia!" Her head snapped toward the voice. "Julian." "I was already on my way," he said gently. "I didn't follow you. I just had a feeling." He stepped out, opened the back door. She didn't move, couldn't. Her limbs were frozen from more than the cold. "I can take you somewhere safe." No strings, he said. We keep emergency apartments through the foundation. It's yours as long as you need it. She swallowed hard. Why are you doing this? Julian's hands stayed on the wheel, eyes forward. Because I can, and because someone once did the same for my mother. The apartment was small but clean. A staff member was already waiting with blankets, formula, and a crib set up in the corner. Amelia stood at the threshold, 2 babies in her arms, unsure whether to walk in or run away. But the room was quiet, warm. Still, Julian didn't say much, just handed her the key and nodded once. Sleep, feed your boys, tomorrow we talk. If you want to. She called out to him once as he turned to go. Julian? He turned. Did you mean it? On the plane. When you said I looked like someone who needed rest. He smiled. I meant every word, and I still do. He closed the door behind him with the soft click of someone who understood how to leave without making someone feel abandoned. Amelia stood alone in the room, holding her sons. For the first time in months, she let herself hope. Amelia Grant woke before the sun. For a few precious seconds, she wasn't sure where she was. The bed didn't creak. The sheets were clean. The silence wasn't ominous, it was comforting. She lay still, listening. Evan and Elias slept soundly in a borrowed crib near the window. Their tiny chests rose and fell in sync, their faces peaceful in a way she rarely saw. The space heater buzzed softly in the corner. For the first time in months, there were no shouts, no slammed doors, no fear pulling her out of sleep like a hook in the dark. She swung her legs over the side of the bed slowly, her muscles still sore from travel and stress. Her eyes scanned the modest apartment, compact but thoughtful. A small kitchenette had been stocked with formula, diapers, wipes, and even a bottle warmer. Someone had prepared this not as a favor, but as a plan. It wasn't charity. It felt like care. On the counter was a handwritten note. Take the day. Rest if you can. Tomorrow, if you're ready, we talk. J.W. There was no pressure, no list of tasks, no expectation. Just time. Just space. Amelia held the note for a long moment before folding it and slipping it into her pocket. She spent most of the morning tending to the twins, feeding, changing, soothing, and holding them against her chest until they dozed off again. There were no sudden knocks, no tension in her spine waiting for things to go wrong. The stillness was strange. Not unwelcome, just unfamiliar. In the afternoon, there was a soft knock at the door. She tensed. Then a woman's voice, warm and even. Miss Grant, I'm from Westbrook Foundation. My name's Renee Carter. May I come in? Amelia opened the door cautiously. Renee wore a light jacket with the foundation's logo stitched above her heart. She looked to be in her early 40s, kind eyes, calm energy. The kind of woman who didn't rush you into trust but quietly earned it. I'm here to check in, Renee said. Just talk. No paperwork today unless you want to. They sat at the small table while the twins napped. Renee asked about the boys' medical needs, feeding schedule, what Amelia needed most in the short term. I'm not looking for handouts, Amelia said quietly. I just need a stable place, something temporary. I'll work, I don't want to be someone's project. Renee nodded. You're not. Our job is to listen and respond, not to rescue. You tell us what you want your next step to be. That's how this works. No lectures, no judgment, just space. It disarmed Amelia more than any kindness had in years. By evening, the apartment was quiet again. The twins were asleep in their crib, their tiny fists curled beside their faces. Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, Julian's card in her hand. She hadn't called. She hadn't needed to. And somehow, that made it feel more real. She turned the card over between her fingers, not to read it again, but to remind herself it was real. That this piece was real. Then, softly, she whispered into the dim room, not to anyone, not even to herself, but to the air that no longer pressed down on her chest. I'm not broken. A pause. A breath. Not anymore. The next morning, she was standing in front of the mirror with her hair pulled back, her hands steadier than they'd been in months. The twins were full and sleeping again. The apartment was warm. The space heater hummed like background music for a new life. Renee had mentioned that Julian would stop by today only if Amelia wanted. She'd said yes before she realized she had. Not because she owed him anything, but because for the first time in a long time she had questions. And maybe she deserved answers. The knock came just after 9 a.m. Julian stood at the door holding 2 paper cups and a small bag. There's a bakery down the street, he said, like it was the most casual thing in the world. I brought coffee and something that might pass for breakfast. Amelia stepped aside and let him in. He moved with quiet familiarity, placing the bag on the table, his eyes scanning the room with no judgment, just curiosity. How are they? He asked, nodding toward the sleeping twins. Sleeping, she said. For now. Julian smiled. That's something. They sat across from each other at the tiny table. The space between them wasn't far, but it didn't feel invasive. It felt honest. Amelia didn't waste time. Why me? She asked. Why that flight? Why did you step in? Julian opened his coffee slowly, as if he needed a moment to think. Then he looked up and met her eyes. Because I've seen that look before, he said. The one you had that night. Amelia stayed quiet. My mother had it when I was a kid, Julian continued. Right before we left my father. She worked 2 jobs. Raised me alone. When I was 8, she collapsed in a bus station after working a double shift. Everyone just walked by. He looked down at the table, his voice even. I sat there next to her for 20 minutes before someone even asked if we were okay. Amelia swallowed hard. I promised myself, Julian said, that if I ever had the power to change what that moment felt like for someone else, I would. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full. You're a billionaire, Amelia said, running one of the biggest foundations in the country, and you still remember a moment in a bus station? I've never forgotten what it feels like to have no one, he said. And I saw you, not just the babies. You were exhausted and invisible to everyone around you. She looked at the coffee in front of her. I don't want to be someone's charity case. You're not, Julian said firmly. You're a person who deserves a real chance. That's it. There was a long beat of quiet. What happens now? She asked. Julian didn't rush his answer. That's up to you. The apartment is yours as long as you need it. Renee will help you figure out housing, childcare, next steps. No conditions. You decide what you want. We'll help you get there. And you? She asked. Where do you fit into this? Julian's voice softened. I don't know yet. That depends on whether you ever want to see me again. He stood, gathering his empty cup. No pressure, he said at the door. Just coffee and space. Amelia watched him go. She turned back to the table, picked up the second cup, and for the first time since Paris, she took a sip without shaking. 2 days later, Amelia Grant stepped out of the Westbrook Foundation apartment with a stroller, a borrowed coat, and something she hadn't felt in a very long time, purpose. It wasn't grand or loud. It wasn't a full plan, but it was something. With Renee Carter's help, she'd enrolled in a city-run support program for mothers with young children. She'd already been scheduled for an intake interview at a women's employment center. The paperwork was dense. The questions were invasive. But Amelia had filled them out anyway, not because she had all the answers, because she finally had the courage to look for them. There was structure to her day now. Wake up, feed the twins, call the community childcare line. Walk to the center, fill out another form, learn about part-time shifts at a nearby laundromat. Ask about night classes, go home, rest. Repeat. It wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting. But it was hers. On a quiet afternoon, as she turned the corner onto her new block, her phone buzzed. A message from the building's front desk. "A man came by asking for you." Said he was from Paris, left a note. Her heart stopped. She hadn't told anyone where she was. Not her old neighbors, not even the women at the shelter. The only people who knew were Julian, Renee, and 2 staff members from the Westbrook Foundation. She turned the stroller around and walked briskly back toward the building. Her palms began to sweat. Her pulse raced. At the front desk, the clerk handed her a plain envelope. The handwriting was sharp, unmistakably familiar. It was in French. "Lana, we need to talk. You can't hide forever. I'm in New York. You know where to find me. Derek." She folded it slowly. Her fingers trembled. Derek Langston had found her. The panic swept in like a wave. She felt it hit her throat first, then her chest. Her hands gripped the stroller handle like a lifeline. The man she had spent months escaping, who once grabbed her arm so hard it bruised for weeks, who used her silence against her, who held their son's birth certificates like shackles, was now here, in the same city, just blocks away. That evening, after she'd bathed the twins and watched them drift into sleep, she sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, the lights off, the shadows across the wall shifting like ghosts. She didn't tell Renee, not yet. But she couldn't sit with this fear alone. She picked up her phone. She didn't type a message. She called. Julian answered on the first ring. "Is this a bad time?" she asked, voice barely there. "No," he said, steady. "What's wrong?" There was a beat. "Derek found me," she said. Another beat. Silence, but not hesitation. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "At the apartment, with the boys." "They're asleep. I'm on my way." She opened her mouth to object, to say, "You don't need to come," but stopped. For once, she didn't want to be alone. Not out of weakness, but because she was tired of pretending she didn't need anyone. 20 minutes later, Julian walked into the apartment. He looked at her, then at the envelope she handed him. He read it once, folded it neatly, set it down. "We'll handle it," he said. "You're not going through this alone." She sank into the couch. "He'll say he wants visitation, that he's just trying to reconnect. He'll twist things, make it sound like I left without warning. He's good at that." "I've seen men like him before," Julian said quietly. "They use control like currency. But we have legal counsel, and more importantly, we have proof, records. Medical documentation, a timeline, witnesses if it comes to that." Amelia shook her head slowly. "He's not going to stop. Then neither will we." She looked at him, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "How are you always so calm?" "I'm not," Julian said. "But I've learned that when someone's standing in the middle of a storm, the least helpful thing you can do is panic with them." She laughed. Not a full laugh, just a tired exhale that felt like the first release she'd allowed herself in hours. Julian didn't stay long. Before he left, he added just one thing. "We've protected women in situations far worse than this. You're not a burden. You're not the exception. You're exactly the reason Westbrook Foundation exists." As the door clicked shut behind him, Amelia leaned her head against the wall. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since she boarded that plane, she wasn't planning her escape. She was planning her defense. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror again. She looked the same. But she wasn't. Her back was straighter, her eyes sharper. Her fear still existed, yes, but it no longer controlled her. She was tired of hiding. Later that day, another message arrived. From Derek. No threats this time, just an address and a time. "I deserve to be heard," it said. That was all. She didn't owe him anything. Not her presence, not her time, but she knew how this worked. If she didn't show up, he'd escalate, file something in court, show up at daycare, harass her neighbors, push until she broke. She was done being cornered. She walked into the cafe 5 minutes early. He was already there, dressed the way he always did in Paris. Casual. Calculated. He stood when he saw her, smiled like they were old friends. "You look tired," he said, as if the last year hadn't happened. "I'm here for one reason," Amelia said. "Say what you came to say." Derek didn't flinch. "You took my sons. You disappeared without warning." "You mean without your permission?" she replied. He leaned forward. "We could figure this out, together. I've made mistakes." "But we're still their parents." "No," she said. "You're their biological father. That's not the same thing as being a parent." He narrowed his eyes. "You think you're going to raise them on sympathy, with help from strangers? I'm raising them on peace," she said. And for the first time, they finally have it. His voice dropped, colder now. "You've got someone helping you, don't you? Some new man?" She didn't answer. "You think he can replace me?" She stood up. "No one is replacing you, Derek. You were never there to begin with." That's when she noticed Julian, just inside the cafe door. He hadn't interrupted. He was just there, watching, quiet. Ready. Derek saw him too. His jaw tightened. Julian stepped forward. "This meeting is over," he said. Derek scoffed. "And who are you?" Julian didn't blink. "The man who's not afraid of you." Derek said nothing. He just stared at Amelia one last time. "You're making a mistake." "I've made a lot of mistakes," she said, "but walking away from you wasn't one of them." Outside, Julian held the door for her, but didn't touch her, didn't lead. He simply walked beside her. "You didn't need me in there," he said. "I know," Amelia replied. "But it helped." They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. They just kept walking. And this time she wasn't walking away. She was walking forward. 3 days later, Amelia sat at the end of a long glass conference table in a downtown law office. The twins were with a childcare volunteer at the Westbrook Foundation. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, but her shoulders didn't slump the way they used to. Not anymore. Beside her sat Renee Carter, calm and composed as ever, flipping through a folder of legal documents. Across from them sat a family court attorney, a woman in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, deliberate and kind. They had been here for nearly an hour. Amelia had said very little, not because she was afraid, but because she was listening, absorbing, preparing. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about her sons. Derek Langston had filed a petition for joint custody. The document arrived in a thick white envelope 2 days after the cafe confrontation. It was full of polished language, deep concern for the children's well-being, desire to reconnect as a father, uncertainty about the stability of the mother's situation. It read like a script written by someone who'd never once held Evan or Elias during a 2 a.m. feeding. Someone who didn't know Elias's chest still needed the oxygen monitor at night. Someone who hadn't left bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. But it didn't matter how it read. What mattered was the response. And Renee had come prepared. Amelia watched as she slid each piece of evidence across the table with quiet confidence, never rushing, never dramatizing, just truth. Police records from Paris documenting noise complaints and domestic calls, a medical file from the hospital showing postpartum injuries consistent with stress and trauma, photos of the shelter. Amelia first arrived at in New York. Signed letters from Foundation staff verifying Amelia's timeline, proof of Derek's absence in the twins' lives from birth to now. The attorney reviewed the stack in silence, nodding slowly. "He's trying to control the narrative," Renee said. "But we have the story in full." Amelia exhaled. For the first time that morning, her hands unclenched. The attorney leaned forward, fingers steepled. "This case likely won't go far," she said. "He has no stable presence in the children's lives. No consistent record of support. At best, he might be granted supervised visitation, but even that depends on whether he follows through, which, based on his history, is doubtful." Amelia nodded slowly. She wasn't naive. She knew how people like Derek operated. They didn't care about connection, they cared about control. About narrative, about pride. This wasn't about fatherhood. This was about power, and she was done letting him hold it. That evening, Amelia returned to the apartment, her coat still damp from the cold drizzle outside. The twins were playing on a small mat in the living room, soft coos rising between the clinking of plastic toys. She dropped her bag, crouched down, and held both boys close. They were warm. They were safe. They were hers. Her phone buzzed. "A message from Julian. I have something for you. Can I stop by?" She replied with one word. "Yes." 20 minutes later, he stepped into the apartment, holding a slim manila folder. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something different this time, something quiet and final. He handed her the folder. "You should see this." She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from Derek's attorney. It was simple. The custody petition had been formally withdrawn. No court date, no battle, no more threats. Amelia stared at the paper. Her fingers didn't shake. "So that's it?" she asked quietly. "That's it," Julian said. "He's done. Or at least, he's done trying to force his way in." She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She just nodded, letting the truth settle. Like sand after a storm. They sat in silence for a moment, not because there was nothing to say, but because they didn't need to say it right away. Then she turned to him. "Thank you, not just for this, for everything. For not trying to fix me, for letting me stand." Julian met her eyes. "I never wanted to fix you. I just wanted to make sure the world didn't break you further." She held that line for a beat, then gave a small, steady smile. Not for him, for herself. The next morning, Amelia woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The past was still there, but no longer dictating her every breath. The boys needed feeding, the laundry needed folding. There was another job fair scheduled for next week. A city centre was opening spots for GED prep courses. She hadn't picked a path yet, but now there was space to choose. And that choice was everything. 6 weeks passed, then 2 months. Amelia didn't move out of the Westbrook apartment immediately, but she started building toward it. With Renee's help, she secured part-time work at a non-profit thrift store run by the foundation. It wasn't glamorous, but it had flexibility, and it mattered. Some days she worked the register. Other days she sorted donations or helped other mothers fill out housing forms. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was participating. She was showing up, not only for herself, but for the version of herself that once sat on a curb with 2 crying infants, unsure if she'd make it another day. She hadn't forgotten that woman. She was carrying her forward. One afternoon, as she packed up after a long shift, Julian appeared at the entrance of the center. He wasn't wearing a suit, just jeans and a dark grey sweater. "Hey," he said. "I heard you're killing it back there in donations." She smiled. "I've become a master of folding jeans and dodging emotional breakdowns." He laughed softly. "You've come a long way," he said. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "So have you." There was a pause, not heavy, just full. Then she added, "But I'm not done yet. I've still got more steps to take." Julian nodded. One step at a time. 6 months had passed since Amelia Grant stepped off that flight from Paris. 2 fragile babies clutched to her chest and no clear path ahead. 6 months since she'd sat on a freezing curb outside a full shelter, thinking she had no one left. And yet now, she stood at the front desk of the Westbrook Resource Center, gently checking in a woman with a toddler balanced on her hip, fear tucked behind her eyes. Amelia didn't ask too many questions. She didn't talk about forms or timelines. She simply said, "You're safe now. Let's take it one step at a time." Those words had once carried her. Now they were hers to pass on. After completing the Foundation's employment program, Amelia had been offered a part-time position on the outreach team. It was entry-level, modest pay, flexible hours, but it was a role with weight a bridge between where someone was and where they could go. Each time a new mother walked through the door, exhausted, embarrassed, unsure, Amelia knew exactly what to do, not because she was trained in psychology or social work, but because she had lived it. She still lived it. Outside, the fall sun spilled across the courtyard behind the center, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. Amelia stepped out during her break, a mug of peppermint tea warming her hands. The twins were at daycare down the street, growing bigger and louder by the day. She sometimes missed the softness of those early months, even with all their chaos. But then she remembered how terrified she'd been, how lost, how she never imagined she'd make it this far. Julian was already in the courtyard, leaning against the railing, coffee in hand, suit jacket folded over his arm. He wasn't just the founder here. He was present. Every week, not in meetings or interviews, but here, listening, watching. "Another long day?" she asked. He smiled, tired. "They all are, but they're good days." She sipped her tea and stood beside him, watching traffic roll past the edge of the property. "You've built something real here," she said. "You helped build it," he replied. She looked down, bashful, then shrugged. "I just try to do what someone once did for me." Julian's voice lowered slightly. "You do more than that. You remind people they're not invisible." There was a long pause, not uncomfortable, just full. He set his coffee on the railing, then turned to her. "Amelia, I've told you pieces of this before, but there's something I need to say completely." She looked up, cautious but open. "I didn't help you because I felt guilty or out of charity. I helped you because you deserve better. Because I couldn't watch someone trying so hard to hold everything together, with nothing." Amelia didn't flinch, didn't smile. She just listened. "And since then," Julian continued, "watching you fight for your boys, for your future, it's changed how I see things, how I see you." His words hung between them, soft but certain. "I care about you, Amelia. Deeply. I'm not asking for anything, but if there's room in your life for someone like me, I'd be honored to be part of it. Just as I am." He didn't step closer. He didn't reach for her hand. He just stood there, waiting, not for permission, but for the truth. Amelia let the silence settle. She didn't rush her response. Because she wasn't the woman who needed saving anymore. She wasn't the woman who mistook kindness for romance or attention for commitment. She was standing on her own. And that meant she could choose, finally. She looked him in the eye. "You're not just part of my life, Julian," she said. "You're one of the reasons I believe in it again." She didn't say it like a confession. She said it like a truth. That evening, Amelia picked up the twins from daycare. Evan clapped the moment he saw her, drooling and delighted. Elias reached for her with his whole body, like he couldn't bear the 2 feet between them. On the walk home, the city hummed all around her, sirens, car horns, barking dogs, the chatter of lives she'd never know. But inside her, it was still. Not silent. Just peaceful. Back at the apartment, she fed the boys, bathed them, and tucked them into bed. Their crib was now too small for much longer, another sign of change she hadn't been ready for. She sat at the small table with her tea, thinking back to that night on the plane, the fear, the crying, the weight. She remembered not just how it felt to carry all of it, but how it felt when someone finally helped her set it down, not take it away. Just share the weight. She wasn't defined by what she had survived anymore. She was becoming the woman she never thought she could be. Not despite the pain, because of it. The letter came on a Tuesday. Folded neatly into a manila envelope, it sat in Amelia's mailbox at the Westbrook Foundation apartment, quiet and unassuming. She almost mistook it for another reminder about upcoming daycare subsidies or a utility bill, but the letter wasn't about maintenance or paperwork. It was an offer, permanent housing. An apartment unit had opened up across town's mall, affordable, near a good public elementary school. Managed through a partner program of the foundation, it would be in her name. Her lease, her keys, her choice. Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, the letter spread open beside her. The twins were napping, their soft breaths filling the quiet like a lullaby. She hadn't expected to feel conflicted. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? Her own place. Her own door to lock at night, her own set of chipped dishes in cabinets she could fill. A space not borrowed, not temporary, not bound to anyone else's schedule or support. But as she traced her fingers across the line move-in available November 1st, a strange feeling crept in. Was she ready to leave this behind? Not the apartment, not the furniture, the foundation, the people. Renee Carter had become more than a social worker. She was a sister in quiet resilience, a mirror of who Amelia could become, calm, capable, never condescending. And Julian? She exhaled at the thought of him. Their connection had deepened slowly, like roots growing underground, quiet but undeniable. There were still boundaries, still space. But the air between them had shifted. There was trust, admiration, and something deeper she hadn't let herself name. She picked up the letter again and read it from the top. Then she folded it and placed it under the lamp. That afternoon, she walked the 3 blocks to the community courtyard where Julian often took his calls when he needed to think. Sure enough, he was there, sleeves rolled, tie tucked into his shirt pocket, pacing slowly with his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw her, he held up a finger to finish the call, then slid the phone into his pocket. "You got the letter," he said, already knowing. She nodded. "Yeah, I did. He didn't push." Didn't ask what she planned to do. Instead, he said, "How do you feel?" Amelia looked down at her hands, then up. "I thought I'd feel excited. I thought I'd want to pack immediately, but part of me feels like I'm leaving something behind. Like if I go, I lose the version of me that was rebuilt here." Julian nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "That version of you goes with you. You're not leaving it. You're living it." They sat down on a bench at the edge of the courtyard. Leaves drifted down from a nearby tree. Autumn had crept in quietly. "I don't want to feel dependent," she said. "You're not," he replied. "Needing people isn't the same as being dependent. You've built every step of this life. No one carried you, you walked it. And you still are." She bit the inside of her cheek. "So why does it feel so final?" "Because it's change," he said gently. "Even good change has grief in it. You're allowed to miss this chapter while being excited about the next." There was a long, comfortable silence. Then he added more quietly, "And no matter where you move, this place, these people, we're still here." She nodded. "I know. And me," he said finally. "I'm still here. However close you want me to be." She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. That evening, Amelia returned to the apartment and told the twins, though they couldn't understand, that they might have a new home soon. A bigger room, a real kitchen, maybe even a dog one day. She placed the letter in a folder beside the crib and pulled out her journal. She hadn't written in weeks, but now the words came. "Today, I chose." Not because I had no other option, but because I finally had more than one. She smiled to herself. That night, she called Renee. I'm saying yes, she said. Renee didn't shout, didn't squeal, she just said, I'm proud of you. Let's get to work. The days that followed were full of lists and logistics. Walkthroughs, rental agreements, transferring benefits, enrolling in the local childcare cooperative. Julian stopped by one morning with a small set of kitchen basics used items from the foundation donation pool. A frying pan, measuring cups, a set of mismatched spoons. He didn't stay long, just helped her load a box into the car, then paused before getting behind the wheel. Moving day is a milestone, he said, but it's not the finish line. If anything, it's where the next race starts. Amelia chuckled. No pressure then, he smiled. No pressure, just momentum. On move-in day, Amelia stood in the doorway of her new apartment with the boys at her feet. The space was modest, a two-bedroom with creaky floors and sun-stained windows, but it was light-filled and full of possibility. She stepped inside. She wasn't just moving into an apartment, she was occupying her own life, no longer a guest, no longer a survivor, a woman with a home. The first few weeks in her new apartment were quiet. Too quiet sometimes. Gone were the familiar sounds of the Westbrook Foundation building, the soft murmur of women talking down the hall, the clinking of coffee mugs in the shared kitchen, the occasional laughter that floated through open windows. In their place, stillness. A refrigerator that hummed louder than it needed to, the squeak of her own footsteps on the hardwood, the occasional cry of her boys in the middle of the night. But Amelia Grant didn't fear the silence anymore. She owned it. Each morning she rose before the sun, fed Evan and Elias, laid out the mismatched clothes from donation bins that now looked like a wardrobe. She brewed a small pot of coffee and stood by the window, watching as the street below filled with the hum of working-class life, delivery vans, buses, early dog walkers. She'd taken on more hours at the thrift store, started leading orientation for new mothers at the foundation, volunteered to write grant thank you notes. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it made her feel useful. Her apartment still smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust, but it was slowly filling with signs of life. There were crayon scribbles on the corner of the wall, a chipped mug Julian had left behind on moving day, a sticky note on the fridge from Renee that read, milk, courage, and patience. It was a list and a reminder, all in one. One Thursday morning, Amelia stood in line at the post office with Elias in her arms and Evan strapped to her chest in a sling. It had taken 45 minutes just to get out of the house. She was running on 4 hours of sleep and one granola bar. The woman in line behind Herolder, with kind eyes, smiled. You make this look easy, she said. Amelia nearly laughed. Oh, it's not. The woman nodded. Doesn't mean you're not doing it beautifully. Amelia blinked, stunned for a moment. Not at the compliment, but at how deeply it landed. Later that evening, after the boys were in bed and the apartment had been picked up for the third time that day, Amelia made a cup of tea and sat by the window with her phone. No messages, no missed calls. No. Julian had given her space since the move, not in a distant way, but in a respectful one. He'd stopped by with groceries once, checked in by text every few days. Always short, always kind. How's the new water heater holding up? Let me know if you need help baby-proofing the balcony. Thinking of you. Nothing pushy. Nothing assumptive. And yet, she missed him. Not in the way she'd once missed people who disappeared, but in a way that made her feel present. Grounded. She opened her messaging app, typed out a few words, then erased them, then typed again. You free this weekend? I could use some help assembling the boys' new crib, and I make a decent grilled cheese. She hit send before she could overthink it. Julian showed up on Saturday afternoon with a box of tools and a bag of groceries. Trade deal, he said at the door. I build, you feed. Amelia laughed, letting him in. As they worked together tightening screws, arguing over the instruction manual, wiping drool off Elias's forehead. Amelia felt something shift again. Not big, not sudden, just solid. There was no tension in the room, no guessing, no pretending. When the crib was finished and the boys were down for a nap, she handed Julian a paper plate with 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and a glass of store-brand lemonade. "This might be the fanciest meal I've had in months," he said with mock reverence. "Watch it," she warned. I added garlic powder this time. They ate in silence for a few minutes, then Julian set his plate down and leaned back. "You look different," he said gently. Amelia raised a brow. "Tired?" "No," he smiled. "Steady." She paused, the compliment settling somewhere deep in her chest. "I feel it," she said. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not just waiting for the next disaster. I'm living." Julian nodded. "That's not nothing." "No," she said. "It's everything." But life, Amelia had learned, didn't stay perfectly balanced for long. 3 days later, a letter appeared under her door. No stamp, no envelope, just a single page, written in Derek Langston's sharp, unmistakable handwriting. "I've changed. I deserve a second chance to be a father. I won't stay silent forever." There was no threat, but the weight of his presence returned instantly. Amelia stood in the doorway for a long time, the paper in her hand, her boys playing behind her on the rug. She didn't cry, she didn't crumble, but she did feel her breath tighten. He was still watching, still waiting for a moment of weakness. That night, she didn't call Julian. She didn't call Renee. She called the legal team at Westbrook, calmly, clearly, like a woman who had learned how to ask for help on her terms. They took the letter, logged it, added it to the file. "We've got you," the attorney said. Amelia exhaled. "I know." She didn't tell Julian about the letter until a few days later, over coffee on a park bench, while the twins chased a pigeon in lopsided circles. "He won't stop," she said. "He might not," Julian agreed, "but I won't either." Julian looked at her longer this time. Not with pity, not with worry, just respect. "I never doubted that." Later that evening, as Amelia tucked the boys into their new crib, Elias, with his left arm stretched like a starfish, Evan already drooling on his blankets, he whispered something she hadn't said in a long time. "You're safe." Then, a beat later, "And so am I." Amelia Grant wasn't used to being on a stage. She'd spent most of her life quietly navigating the edges, fitting her pain into small spaces, keeping her voice low so it didn't echo too far. But now she stood behind a podium at the Westbrook Foundation's annual fall benefit, a microphone in front of her and hundreds of eyes watching. She took a breath, held it, let it go. The lights weren't blinding, but the moment was. Just 2 months ago, she would have said no. When Renee first asked if she'd be willing to share a little about her journey, Amelia laughed. Share what? The worst year of her life? The nights she thought the crying would never stop, that she'd vanish in a city too big to care. But then she thought about the woman sitting in the last row tonight, shoulders curled in on herself, arms wrapped around a child just like Amelia had been months ago. Someone who hadn't yet heard their own name spoken with kindness. So here she was. No script, just truth. She cleared her throat and began. 6 months ago, I landed at JFK with 2 infants, a suitcase with a broken zipper, and no plan. I'd left Paris behind not because I had somewhere better to go, but because staying meant disappearing. There was no movement in the room, no murmurs. Just stillness. I didn't have friends waiting, no job lined up. No family. I had a shelter address I'd found online, and a quiet prayer that they'd let me in. She paused. They didn't. A ripple of emotion moved through the audience, but Amelia didn't flinch. I sat on the sidewalk that night with both babies crying in my arms and thought, this must be the end. Not in a dramatic way, just in a tired way. in a maybe I won't make it through the night kind of way. She glanced at Julian, sitting a few rows back. His eyes didn't leave hers, but someone did stop, a man I barely knew at the time. Someone who didn't ask what I'd done wrong to get here or what my plan was for fixing it. He just opened a door, literally. He gave me a room, a warm crib for my sons, silence that wasn't hostile. And then he left me alone because he understood that kindness without pressure is a powerful thing. Amelia looked out over the audience again. And from there, it wasn't magic. It wasn't easy. There were still hard nights. There still are. But the Westbrook Foundation gave me something that had been taken from me slowly, quietly, until I almost forgot I ever had it. She paused. My dignity. A hush fell over the room. I'm not standing here today as a success story, she continued. I'm not fixed. I'm not polished. I'm still figuring out how to juggle daycare pickups and job applications and the laundry that never ends. But I'm not surviving anymore. I'm living. And more than that, I'm giving back. She smiled gently. I lead new mom orientations now. I help women who show up scared, tired, and silent just like I did. And I tell them the same thing someone once told me. You're safe now, one step at a time. Amelia stepped back from the mic. Thank you. Applause rose slowly, then spread like warmth through the room. Not polite applause, real applause. The kind people give when they've seen someone peel back something raw and stand tall anyway. As Amelia walked back to her seat, she felt her legs trembling. Not from fear, from power. Later that evening, after the event, she stood outside the venue in her coat, letting the chill of the evening cut through the adrenaline. Julian stepped beside her. You were incredible, he said quietly. I almost threw up twice backstage. Still incredible. They stood in silence for a moment, watching guests file out, their voices fading into the hum of the city. Then Julian turned to her. Can I say something selfish? She nodded. I don't want this to end with a speech, he said. I don't want to just be part of your story as a chapter. I'd like to be part of your story. On purpose. She looked at him. Really looked. Not as the man who had helped her, not as the one who had opened a door, but as the man who had stood beside her, quietly, patiently, without ever asking her to shrink or forget. I'm not scared anymore, she said. Good, he replied. Because I've been scared enough for both of us. She smiled. I'm still figuring things out. I can wait. No more waiting, she said. Then, for the first time, not out of desperation, not out of survival, Amelia leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed, it was real. Two people. Choosing. That night, back in her apartment, Amelia tucked the twins into bed and sat with a cup of tea by the window. The city stretched wide and loud below her, but inside, it was quiet. She looked down at her hands, stronger now, steadier. She didn't need saving anymore, but she had built something even better, a life worth protecting. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows of Amelia Grant's apartment, painting the hardwood floor in gold and shadow. The twins were at daycare. The laundry was folded, for once. The kettle hummed on the stove. It was a rare kind of quiet, the kind you earned. Amelia sat at the kitchen table, a blank notebook in front of her, and a worn pen in her hand. A letter sat to her right, unfolded. An official offer from the Westbrook Foundation. They wanted her to join the Leadership Development Program. It wasn't just about outreach anymore. It was about vision, about shaping policies, expanding services, mentoring other women who had stories like hers but hadn't yet found their voice. It was a position designed for someone who'd lived it, not studied it. She wasn't being asked to retell her trauma, she was being asked to lead from it. Later that day, she met Julian in the courtyard outside the foundation. The last of the autumn leaves swirled around their feet. He was waiting by the railing, coffee in hand, like always. "You heard," he said, offering the extra cup without needing to ask. "I did." "And?" Amelia took a sip before answering. "I said yes." He smiled, but he didn't look surprised. "You were always going to," he said. "Maybe," she admitted, "but I needed to choose it." "On my own," he nodded. "That's the only way it matters." They sat in silence for a while, watching the breeze move through the trees. "I keep thinking about that night on the plane," she said finally. "How you looked at me like I wasn't invisible, like I was worth saving." "You weren't invisible," Julian said. "You were just exhausted." She gave a small laugh. "I still am, but in a better way." He looked at her then, soft and steady. "You know what I remember about that night?" "What?" "How you held them. Even when you were shaking, even when you looked like you might collapse, you never stopped holding them. I knew right then, this woman doesn't quit." Amelia blinked hard against the sting in her eyes. "That's how I feel about this job," she whispered. "I want to hold space for women the way someone held it for me." Julian reached over, not to hold her hand, but just to rest his fingers gently near hers. "You already do." The first day in her new role, Amelia wore the same coat she'd arrived in months ago, the one with the fraying sleeve and missing button. Not because she couldn't replace it, but because it reminded her who she was when this story began. She stood in front of a small group of new arrivals, women and children with heavy eyes and uncertain shoulders. She didn't start with her title. She didn't even start with her name. She started with the sentence that had once saved her. "You're safe now, one step at a time." And then she smiled. Not the smile of someone pretending to be okay. The smile of someone who had walked through fire barefoot and built a life on the ashes. That evening, after the boys were asleep and the apartment was still, Amelia sat by the window again. She opened her notebook and began to write, not a journal, not a letter. Just a list. Who I am now. Mother, builder, survivor, leader, loved. She stared at the last word for a long time, not because she doubted it, but because it still felt new and beautiful. The following weekend, Julian took her and the boys to a quiet park by the river. Evan waddled after falling leaves. Elias squealed every time a dog passed by. Amelia sat on a blanket with a thermos of tea and a heart that no longer feared what might come next. "I used to think survival was the goal," she said softly. Julian looked over at her. "And now? Now I know it was just the starting line." He leaned back, watching the twins tumble into each other and laugh. "You've come so far," he said. "We've all come far," she replied. "But I think the most important thing isn't that I made it. What is? That I made something from it." As the sun dipped low and the city lights flickered to life, Amelia held her sons close. The wind brushed through her hair. Julian's hand rested gently on her shoulder. There was no fanfare, no speech, no final bow. Just life. Full, flawed, beautiful. And completely hers. Life doesn't always give us a second chance, but sometimes kindness does. Amelia's story reminds us that no one is too far gone to begin again. After surviving an abusive marriage, homelessness, and the terrifying unknown of starting over with 2 infants, what saved her wasn't charity. It was compassion offered without conditions. A warm crib, a quiet room. A stranger who didn't try to fix her, but made space for her to heal. For older adults who've seen life twist in ways we never expected, this story is a quiet reminder that dignity can be restored in the simplest acts. Listening without judgment, helping without agenda, and believing someone is more than their worst day. It's never too late to rebuild, not just for ourselves, but for others. Whether you're the one reaching out for help or the one offering a steady hand, you have power. The power to see people, to remind them they're not invisible. and to say with your actions, "You're safe now, one step at a time." That sentence may not change the world, but it can change someone's world, and that's where hope begins.